In the game of power, outshining the master may be the worst mistake of all. And unfortunately, it's a very common mistake. But what's worse is that most people aren't even aware they're breaking it. So when they reap the repercussions of their actions, they're bewildered and confused, not knowing what went wrong. Breaking this law can be fatal, and history has proven this, which is why you need to understand this law and learn from the mistakes of others. By the end, you will also know the exact practical steps and strategies you can start using today in your own life. Let's begin. Always make those above you feel comfortably superior. In your desire to please and impress them, do not go too far in displaying your talents, or you might accomplish the opposite, inspire fear and insecurity. Make your masters appear more brilliant than they are, and you will attain the heights of power. Transgression of the law. Nicolas Fouquet was King Louis XIV's finance minister. He was indispensable to the king. Fouquet was very clever and had amassed an enormous amount of wealth, living an extremely lavish lifestyle. He was someone of high status, with connections and relationships with the European high society. But as he would soon realize, amassing such wealth and influence would actually cost him his life. When King Louis XIV's prime minister had died, the ambitious Nicolas Fouquet saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reach the heights of power. It was literally the highest position in the country, second only to the king himself. And based on his relationship with the king, he had no doubt that he would be named the successor. But instead, the king decided to abolish the position, which made him suspect that he was beginning to fall out of the king's favor. And so, he had an idea to fall back into the king's good graces. To get back in the king's favor, he decided that he would stage the most spectacular party that the world had ever seen, in which in his mind it would serve as a way to pay tribute to the king, but at the same time celebrate the completion of his newly built chateau. And the event was truly spectacular. It was attended by the highest of nobility in Europe, as well as some of the most brilliant minds of the time, and it was still unlike anything they had ever seen. Fouquet personally accompanied the king, and even the king himself was astonished by the display of such luxury. The next day, Fouquet woke up and found himself under arrest and then put on trial for stealing from the country's treasury. He was then found guilty and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in the country's most isolated prison. So what exactly went wrong? Interpretation. Louis XIV was an extremely proud and arrogant man. The Sun King wanted to be the center of attention at all times. His ego would never allow him to tolerate absolutely anyone to take the spotlight off him. Fouquet's attempt of paying tribute and demonstrating his loyalty actually sent the exact opposite message. He thought that he should highlight his good taste, connections, and charisma so that he could impress the king, making him see that he had all the perfect qualities to be appointed as prime minister, falling back into the king's favor. But unfortunately for him, that was not what he did. Instead, Louis saw this as Fouquet flaunting his wealth and power, and even an open challenge to the king's very own status and authority, so it actually offended him. But more crucially, it led him to feel insecure in his position, so the king could not let this slide. Fouquet had to pay the price. To replace Fouquet, the king then appointed someone he knew would never dare or was even able to outshine him. In fact, he would allow him to continue to steal from the country's treasury, but instead all the money would go straight to the king's hands. And with that money, he would build a palace even more extravagant than that of Fouquet's, hosting parties even more lavish than the ones Fouquet had hosted. Such is the fate, in some form or other, of all those who unbalance the master's sense of self, poke holes in his vanity, or make him doubt his preeminence. Observance. The Godfather. In The Godfather 2, Michael Corleone was preparing for the deal that would open the doors that would take him to the literal heights of power.
One small step, looking for a man that wants to be president of the United States, and having the cash to make it possible.
But he had to go through Hyman Roth, a longtime mob associate and former member of the Corleone Mafia organization under Don Vito Corleone. Although at the time Michael was the most powerful mafia boss in the country, Roth still maintained a very high position and influence among the elite members of the criminal underworld. Roth still viewed himself as a player in the game, even though he acted as if he was just a retired veteran of the mafia, a wise and generous mentor. But behind that facade and his health-related complications, he nonetheless wanted to remain in control, as he had for years. To him, he was still the master. So, even though Michael was now at the top of the mafia, and arguably more powerful than Roth, since he still thought of himself as the master, Michael needed to make sure he didn't overtly outshine him. Hence why Michael took the approach of the student, wanting to gain the wisdom and expertise of this wise mentor.
Whatever I can do to help Michael.
So, Michael applied this law perfectly. He made sure that Roth was secure in his position, and that he was his student rather than equal.
You're a great man, Mr. Roth. There's much I can learn from you.
But as we soon find out, Roth had no real interest or intention in actually involving Michael in the deal, rather was using it as a mere smokescreen to hide his real intentions. But this didn't need to change Michael's strategy. In fact, playing along as if he knew nothing was the correct move to make, as it allowed him to put Roth at ease.
I want him completely relaxed and confident in our friendship.
We can also see Roth's insecurity when Michael brings up a very valid point in which challenged what Roth had previously stated.
It occurred to me, the soldiers are paid to fight, the rebels aren't.
What does that tell you?
We could win.
It's in their blood, believe me, I know. I've been coming here since the 20s. We were running molasses out of Havana when you were a baby.
Roth was insecure and did not tolerate anyone attempting to outshine him, and so tried to put Michael down in his place as someone inexperienced and merely a student, that of Roth. Observance. Galileo, the famous astronomer and mathematician, went from having to rely on the generosity of rulers and wealthy families to fund his research and inventions, essentially having to beg for their patronage, to becoming the Medici's official court philosopher and mathematician with a full salary and support, which was something that most scientists of the time could only dream of. In the past, Galileo would gift his inventions and discoveries to the leading patrons of the time, who in turn paid him with gifts rather than cash. But when he discovered the moons of Jupiter in 1610, he decided to adopt a new strategy. Instead of dividing the discovery among his patrons, he decided to focus on one: the Medicis. And this was not at random. He specifically chose the Medicis because the founder of the dynasty had made Jupiter the symbol of the dynasty. And of course, they were wealthy enough to fund his projects for a lifetime. Interpretation. The brilliance of Galileo's strategy comes down to one simple yet vital concept, making his masters more brilliant than all others, including himself. It was not the significance of the discovery itself that impressed the Medicis. They don't care about its impact on the scientific community. What they care about, the primary reason that they're even willing to spend such large amounts of money on funding such projects, comes down to one thing: glory. And Galileo recognized this and used it to his favor. Instead of attributing them as merely generous funders of a new discovery, Galileo gave them something far more valuable and impactful. He literally aligned their name with the stars, giving them what they truly wanted from such acts of generosity. And so, he got what he wanted, all the while understanding the laws of the game and using them to his benefit so that he could continue to get his financing and a secure position, but still ensuring that his masters were also satisfied and would not feel insecure in any way. Therefore, using the glory of his discovery not to outshine the master, rather making the master outshine all others. Keys to power. Unfortunately, not much has changed since the days of the Medicis or Louis XIV. People who acquire a significant position of power view themselves like kings and queens. They want to be the center of attention, the ones superior to those around them in terms of wit, charm, intelligence, and really everything else. They simply don't want anyone to challenge their position, fearing that they will lose everything they worked for. They are constantly on the lookout for potential threats and attempt to deal with them as soon as possible. Therefore, sensing a potential rival inflames their insecurity, and then they can become liable to do anything to secure their position, which today usually means replacing you with someone far less of a threat. So why did Galileo succeed whereas Fouquet failed? Fouquet made the master feel insecure, offending his self-image and ego, making him sense a potential threat that could destabilize his rule and position. Fouquet made the king feel inferior to him, and so the king replaced him with someone far less of a threat. Whereas in the case of Galileo, he gave all the glory of his work and discovery to his master in a way that made them feel directly responsible for the discovery, making them outshine not just Galileo, but all of the nobles of Italy. And he did it in a way that was not condescending, a manner that did not offend their intellectual authority, and actually seemed somewhat genuine, which in turn gave him what he wanted from the beginning, and all parties benefited. In the game of power, the master wants you to remain under them. They can't stand anyone surpassing them by the way of their own skills and abilities. They want to feel directly involved or the sole reason for your success. Reversal. You don't need to be constantly paranoid of offending everyone you meet or interact with, even those above you. The key is to know exactly when. The laws of power state, you must be selectively cruel. If your superior is a falling star, there is nothing to fear from outshining him. Do not be merciful. Your master had no such scruples in his own cold-blooded climb to the top. Gauge his strength. If he is weak, discreetly hasten his downfall. Outdo, outcharm, outsmart him at key moments. The law also states that if he is very weak and is ready to fall, don't get involved. Let nature take its course. Either way, you just need to be patient and wait for the right moment. Power eventually weakens and slowly fades, so the master will someday fall. Play it right, learn from Fouquet and Galileo, and you will then someday have no problem outshining the master. Of course, today the consequences may not be as lethal as in the past, but the principles are still exactly the same. The law still applies, even today. But even so, don't take this law too literally. Here's a few ethical ways you can start using this law in your own life. Don't be quick to claim all the glory or credit for your accomplishments without acknowledging those who helped you achieve them, especially those above you, such as any mentors or other superiors who have invested and put you in that position. But, and this is very important, make sure you don't overdo it. It becomes unbearable and will have the opposite effect. Try to be as genuine as possible. Secondly, don't show off or flaunt your talents and capabilities at the expense of your superiors. Learn the art of timing. Also, it's naive to think that because you have a great relationship with your superiors, that allows you to do whatever you want. Understand that if you're not careful, you can and will be replaced. Comment below if you've ever experienced or witnessed this law in practice. One last thing.